Hey everyone, I hope you're doing well. I hope you're staying safe and sound in your part of the world. Today, I'm going to come in here and talk to you about how to create your development roadmap for your app. Right now, we've been seeing a massive increase in demand for a lot of our clients' apps, and you might have experienced the same. If you haven't yet, it's likely coming. We've been seeing a massive shift to the online space and to custom apps in general over the past years. Now it's being forced. This demand is only going to continue throughout, the coronavirus and everything that's going on right now. It's going to continue after that too, and that demand is going to stay. So because of that, it's important for you to be able to build your app right now as quickly as you possibly can and as correctly as you possibly can, because now is not the time to be delaying development or backtracking on development, right? Right now is the time you need to be moving quickly. So what does your development roadmap look like, or what should it look like? That's what we're going to talk about today. If you're new around here, my name is Kristen. I'm the co-founder of Coaching No Code Apps, where we help business owners and industry experts build custom apps to start or grow their businesses. So what I'm going to do is open up my whiteboard. I'm going to share my screen here, and we're going to go through this together. Okay. So your roadmap, your development roadmap, the way in which you build your app has three main phases. And it looks kind of like this. So down at the bottom here, you have your MVP, right? This is your minimum viable product, the first version of your app, the version of your app you're building in order to get feedback, which is the next stage. Okay, the next stage you move into is feedback. Now, it's critical that you get feedback, and the right feedback, because that is what is going to thrust you into the rollout stage, right? So in your MVP stage, your main focus is on functionality. Okay. You need to get your product working. You need to make sure it's working so that you can start to get feedback. Now, when it's working, when you start bringing on your initial groups of test users or even beta users, you're going to start getting feedback. Now, during this stage, you're going to go through a number of different cycles where you get feedback and then you iterate. Okay, so this stage is focused largely on iterations. So you build your MVP, you've made sure it's functioning correctly. Now you start to get feedback. With that feedback, you start iterating, you start fixing things, you start enhancing features, you start taking in users' wants and their needs on top of the main functionality and making sure you're solving their problem in the most effective and efficient way you can. So you're going to go through a number of different iterations in this phase, and that's going to kind of take you, or it's going to kind of push you up into the rollout stage, which again involves a number of different cycles. And in reality, you're going to be cycling through this stage for the lifetime of your app. And this is where you're going to focus on expansion. All right, so down in your MVP stage, you are solving the very core problem, what we call your primary user has. You're solving a single core problem for a single primary user. Once you get up to the rollout stage, you might be solving tons of different problems for a number of different users. But it's important to understand that you can't get to a higher stage until you go through the one below it. So you must go from MVP first up into the feedback stage. okay? You have to go in this order. And once you get to and through the feedback stage, that's when you can go into your rollout phase. But you cannot get to the next one until you go through the one before it. You have to go in this order, or you're going to run into vastly expanded timelines for your app's development, or lots and lots of backtracking, which is just going to feed back into those expanded timelines. But there's one more stage you need to be aware of that often gets overlooked, and that is the strategy and planning stage. Okay, this is the absolute most critical stage you have to go through because it creates the entire foundation for your app. Now, most founders, they go through some form of this stage. But if you're like most founders and most people who end up coming to us for help, you may have been in this stage for way too long, or you might not have properly gone through it, which is giving you problems in any of these later stages. We see most people having their app ideas for 6 to 12 months at least, either getting stuck in this stage or skipping the stage altogether and moving straight to here, and having their development timeframes just become long and drawn out because they didn't properly go through this foundational stage, right? So most people either kind of skip this or get stuck here. Right? If they skip it, they end up getting stuck somewhere else. If they get stuck here, it doesn't matter, it still extends their time frame. Now, let me see if I can kind of zoom out here a little bit. This strategy and planning stage, every stage is important in your development cycle. But again, because they build on each other, right? In order to get to your MVP stage, you have to start in this stage down here. This is one of the most important, and it's why we put such a big focus on it in one of our private client programs. So let me see if I can move this over just a little bit more to give us some more space. So in our program, this stage of development is called the framework stage. And it's because you are essentially creating the foundation on which you will build your entire app, right? You're going to go from here all the way up to your rollout stage. But this stage down here, while some people might think it's insignificant, it's the thing that's supporting the rollout phase, right? You can't get here unless you properly go through this stage down here. So what does it look like, right? We put a big emphasis on this with our own clients because of how important it is. So for us, the framework phase has 3 of its own stages, right? And it looks kind of like this. So at the start, when we break this down, we begin with something called the results-driven MVP. So every stage of development has to have a specific goal. Now, you might have a long-term or bigger picture goal for your app, But that big goal has to be broken down into segmented and more granular goals, because at each stage, and even multiple times within each stage, right, within all of these cycles, you have to have a different and smaller or more specific goal, especially with your MVP. So for us, that goal has to be focused on a specific outcome. And this is going to vary depending on your app, but it has to be outcome focused. Because when it's outcome focused, right, when you are driving towards a very specific, tangible, and granular goal, you have a destination. And you have to have a destination in order to create the right, in order to go through the right steps to get there, right? You can't just rely on that big picture, long-term vision in order to steer yourself towards it. You can't just rely on that one. You have to have more granular, outcome-focused goals at every single stage of development, because those will give you more incremental destinations to reach along the way. Now, once we move through this stage, we get to what we call the strategic scope. This is another place where a lot of founders get really stuck. And this is actually a point in development where a lot of people try to go from all the way down here, all the way up here. And the extended time frame and the backtracking, it compounds and it snowballs, right? So if you're skipping the strategic scope phase, you're gonna experience problems like that. So what does this look like? What does this involve? Well, number one, you have to start with the right features in your MVP in this lower stage here. So you have tons of ideas for your app, right? You've probably been planning and envisioning it for a very long time. So how do you take all of those features, that massive vision you have for your app, and how do you create a plan that will let you strategically go from MVP stage to your feedback stage to your rollout stage, and go through a number of iterations and a number of cycles within each of those stages? How do you segment those features out and build them strategically? Well, you have to start with the right features in your MVP so that you don't experience scope creep, so that you can get the right feedback, and so that you can move through development quickly and efficiently. And if you have the right features for your MVP lined up, then you're going to be able to break the rest up into phases, right? We use something called the phase method for development. So we start with a very specific goal-oriented and outcome-oriented MVP, and then we break the rest up into strategic phases so that you can reach this feedback stage as quickly as possible, which is going to push you into the rollout stage. So once we get past the strategic scope, we move into the quick start method. So most people who are building their apps, like I said, they get stuck down here. They even get stuck somewhere in between here, or they just try to go all the way up to this top stage without properly going through the ones below it. What ends up happening is they're either planning their apps or their MVPs for 6 to 12 months or more. We have had people come to us after they've been planning their app for years, even for a decade, but they've never actually seen any tangible success. You can't wait that long, right? You can't keep planning. Maybe you already have been, you can't keep doing that. You can't continue to just plan and plan, or to even build and build without going through the proper stages, because right now you need to be moving quickly. So in the quick start strategy, you have to understand two specific things. First is your development order. Number one, which order or in which order are you going to build your features? So where do you start? Where do you go next? What do you build after that? And so on. You have to build those in a very specific order. And not only that, but within the feature, so breaking that down even further, you have to build each feature in a specific development cycle, right? So what do you build first? Do you build the front end? Do you build the back end? Where do you start? There's a very specific development order you have to follow. And when you follow this, you are going to start being able to anticipate, excuse my handwriting there, anticipate different obstacles. So what we usually see founders doing when they try to build their app, especially when they don't come in with any sort of technical background or experience in this area, is they just start building all their features based on what they feel like working on that day or what seems easiest. So they go into their app, they open up their editor, they start building something, maybe they hit pause for the day, they come back the next day, they start building something else, maybe they get stuck somewhere, so then they move somewhere else just so that they can feel like they're moving forward. What they end up with is a bunch of half-built features or poorly working features because they're not structured correctly. When that happens, it's really hard to anticipate different obstacles or roadblocks that you're going to face in development. When you're going through development in a specific order, not only with your features, right, in what we just talked about, but with your entire development roadmap, you're going to be able to start anticipating roadblocks that you know you're going to come up against, right? And that's massive because most people who don't follow a plan, when they're building their app and they hit those roadblocks, and you might have experienced this too, it can feel really defeating. It can feel like a massive setback because you just can't move forward correctly. And your app can start to feel really scattered, really clunky, really disorganized and messy because things just haven't been built in the right order, in an organized way. You start to run into problem after problem or issue after issue because everything is intertwined, but now the app is so big that you can't pinpoint anything and it all starts to snowball. We've seen it happen time and time again. And again, you might have experienced something like this. And that's why it's so important to go through these steps. So again, while you have specific steps that you must go through when you're creating your development roadmap, you also have to go through these specific steps. When we're narrowing it down to that initial, what we call the framework stage, right? Or the strategy and planning stage, you have to go through these specific steps as well in order to get to the next level. So a good example of this is one of our clients, Zach. He came in after already having started building his app. He'd been working on his app for months and he just kept getting stuck. So he was really stuck right in this MVP functionality stage. He couldn't get anything working how he wanted it to be working. Right now, you might have felt this too. So he came to us for help, and when he started working with us, we had him actually go back, right? Come back down to this strategy and planning level and go through that in full before he went back to the MVP functionality stage. And the transformation he saw was just massive. In vastly less time than he had already been working on his app on his own, he went back through the framework stage, and then he progressed past all the functionality he had already built with new and more substantial and solid functionality that would support his later scale and growth much more quickly than he had before. It's because he went through these stages in the right order, right? You have to go through the lower stage in order to get to the next one. It's just like climbing a ladder. You can't just jump to the top. You have to climb the rungs in order to get to the top. That's how you have to build your app too. So I hope that's helpful. If you're stuck in one of these stages, if you feel like you're stuck in the MVP stage where you're focusing on functionality, it's likely because you didn't go through these steps here in the strategy and planning phase or in the framework phase, right? So if you're stuck up here, it might feel like you are experiencing technical issues. Maybe you're experiencing a lot of bugs or errors in your app. You can't figure out how to move forward, and it's extending your timeline. Well, chances are you need to look in the stage before you and make sure you've gone through that properly. Once you have, you're going to be able to move through the next stage a lot more quickly. And again, I know that speed right now is important. You want to get your app out there so you can meet the demand. So I hope this is helpful in doing that. And listen, if you want help creating not only the correct framework for your app, but also the correct functionality for your MVP so that you can get to this feedback stage that will push you to the rollout stage, reach out. You can head to coachingnocodeapps.com/apply. You can comment on this video or message us privately, and we will see if we can help get you started moving forward more quickly with your app. So thank you for watching. I hope you're doing well, and we will talk soon.